This story is called Dad's Boots. This is a true story, and it's one of my all-time favorites, even though I'm not in the story myself, not even in a crib in the back bedroom. In late November of 1939, the city of Halifax, Nova Scotia, was struck by a sleet storm. The wind howled down out of the North Atlantic and drove the freezing rain through the streets ahead of it in slanting sheets. The icy wetness was scooped up out of eaves troughs and was torn from porch railings and window sills, and as it fell, it froze into rows of icicles that leaned sharply away from the wind. They looked like crystal combs with long, ragged teeth. By 2:30 in the afternoon of that stormy day, Dad had been walking the beat on Lower Water Street for 6.5 hours. His cheeks were red and tingling from being struck by the icy pellets, but he was warm enough under his police constable's rain gear. The black rubber coat came down nearly to his ankles, and it had an extra cloak attached to the top that covered his shoulders and hung to his waist. Sometimes he folded his arms up in under his cloak, and then his hands were shielded from the weather. Sometimes he reached his right hand in through the slit in the side of the coat and rested it on the leather revolver case on his belt. Or else he rested it on the handle of the hardwood billy in its long, narrow pocket on his right pant leg. Dad was proud of his policeman's uniform. At 23, he was the youngest man on the Halifax police force, and he was glad to have the job. Before that, he'd been training at the Nova Scotia Hospital as a male nurse, but jobs as private nurses were hard to find, and they certainly wouldn't pay the $100 a month that he was getting on the police force. At the intersection ahead of Dad, a car skidded around the corner and slid to a stop with its front tires on the sidewalk. When he walked over to check the car, he found the driver had been drinking. "I'm sorry, sir," Dad said, "but I'm going to have to take your keys away from you. Please park just down the block there." "How am I going to get home?" the man said. "I can't walk in this weather." Dad said, "I'll call a taxi for you." He took the man's keys and went across the street to Simon's junk shop to use the phone. Halifax was under prohibition at that time, but there was plenty of liquor for those who knew where to get it, and Lower Water Street was a good place to be getting it. Dad didn't charge the driver. He would be off the streets and safe enough until he was sober and able to come and get his keys from the police station. Dad kept walking. He didn't usually mind being out in the rain, but what bothered him about the storm today was that he hadn't put on his rubber overboots in the morning. The rain hadn't let up since he got out on his beat, and the thin slush had been working its way in through the seams of his new black leather boots. His feet weren't cold, but the bottoms of his heavy woolen socks were wet, and where the little toe of his left foot chafed on the leather, he could feel a blister rising. Dad minded the punishment that his boots were taking as much as he minded the blister on his toe. He took a pride in keeping his boots in top condition. Each day before he left the flat, he took out the cotton laces and rubbed the ankle boots with black polish. After the wax was dry and brushed, he spit on the leather and buffed it briskly with a soft flannel rag until the finish was burnished to a high gloss. On the first day that he had warmed those boots with his new uniform, King George and Queen Elizabeth had ridden in a parade through the streets of the city, and the Halifax police force had been on crowd control duty. There were 3 platoons on the force. The 16 constables in Dad's platoon had been stationed along the first part of the parade route. And after the King and Queen had passed, Dad and the rest of his platoon were driven ahead and were stationed at the tail end of the 3rd platoon. Dad saw the royalty 3 times that day. But anyway, on that stormy afternoon, The light was fading from the sky when Dad stopped at his call box on the corner of Barrington and Jacobs to report into the station for the final time of the day. He was glad to have the Water Street beat done before dark. That was a beat where even the old and experienced policemen walked along the edge of the street if things were looking rough, and they were always careful to keep themselves out of dark shadows. At 4 o'clock, Dad was back at the station. The gale was still blowing, but the rain had let up. After he checked in, he took a streetcar home. Dad had to walk that last little bit from the corner of Ammon Street to the flat at 628 Roby, across from the Bloomfield School. His feet were soaked, and he was hungry, and he hoped that Mum would have a hot supper ready to put on the table. Inside the vestibule of the duplex, he stamped the wetness off his boots. He took off his outer gear and carried his things upstairs to their second-floor flat. Mum greeted him at the door, rosy in the face from working over the oil range in the kitchen. She held the baby, Laura, over her shoulder and was patting her on the back to make her burp. Dad gave them both a kiss. He inhaled deeply. He said, "Smells like corned beef and cabbage." Mom said, "It is." She said, "It's been a terrible day. The house has been shaking in the wind all afternoon. Are you frozen, honey?" Dad said, "I'm warm enough, but my new boots are soaked, and I think I've got a blister on my little toe." He came into the kitchen and sat down by the stove and undid his laces while Mum put the baby to sleep in their bedroom. When she came back, she said, "Let me take your boots. I'll set them in the oven to dry out." She lowered the oven rack to the bottom of the oven and put the boots inside and left the oven door ajar. Then she dished out a steaming mound of cabbage with big chunks of rosy brown corned beef, and they sat down to eat. "I had a caller today," Mum said. "I don't know what he was doing out on a day like this. It was the real estate salesman." "The one who wants us to buy that new house on Connaught Avenue for $4,500? "Yes, the 2-story white one with the 3 bedrooms, the one we liked." She got up and poured them each a cup of strong black tea. Dad said, "I already told him we don't have the $300 for the down payment." Mum said, "Now he says he could make arrangements for us to finance the $300. They talked about the new house while Mum cut them a wedge of Washington pie. Washington pie is a cake. It's a 2-layer cake that's yellow because it's made with lots of eggs. There's cranberry sauce between the layers that bulges out around the sides. And then there's a thin white icing on the top that's sprinkled with long strands of shredded coconut. And it's a round cake." "What did he say the monthly payments would be?" Dad asked. $40. That's only $15 more than we're paying here for rent." "I don't know, Phyllis," Dad said. "I'm not sure my salary would stretch that far. We hardly have any furniture yet, and I wouldn't like to get in debt over my head." "I told him you'd probably feel that way," Mum said. "And I agree with you, too. But he said it would be a good investment. He said the economy is going to rise in the next few years." "Well, we'll see," Dad said. "I'm sure he'll be back to see us again." They talked through the evening. And because their minds were full of furniture and salary and the house on Connaught Avenue, neither of them noticed when the door to the oven got shut. Through the early part of the evening, the wind howled around the corners of the building. It whined in the cracks of the windows, and it blew up the drain pipe and rattled in the kitchen sink. But before bedtime, the screaming wind blew the clouds away down to the New England states, and then the wind raced away after them. Storms over Halifax were often fierce, but the skies were always on the move, and bad weather left as suddenly as it brewed up. Soon the stars were twinkling over the quiet city, and the temperature dropped. It was going to be a bitterly cold night. Before they went to bed, Mum cooked their oatmeal porridge in the double boiler and when it was done, she set it on the shelf of the stove. The porridge would set overnight into a thick brown gel, and in the morning Mum would stir some hot water into it. She'd heat it again and serve it with brown sugar and the cream that she took out of the top of the glass milk bottle. "Brr, it's turning cold," Mum said. "I'm going to keep the range turned on overnight to keep the chill off the kitchen." This is where the plot begins to thicken. Dad went down the back stairs to the basement and brought up a hod of coal to put in the big heater in their hallway. That heater stood over 5 feet tall and had a big pot belly. There were little isinglass windows all around so you could look through and see the red coals glowing in there. On the top of the round pot belly part was a drum. Dad opened the lid of this drum and poured in his full bucket of coal. The drum fed the coal down into the burning part gradually, so the stove only needed to be filled once at bedtime and once again in the morning, and it gave an even, continuous heat through the whole day. Dad didn't burn the soft, bituminous coal that was mined in Cape Breton. He bought hard anthracite coal that was shipped from Pennsylvania. The hard coal burned hotter and more slowly, and it made no smoke. It never burned with a flame, but it just turned red and glowed until it had disintegrated into a fine ash. Some of that ash formed a big hard clinker that had to be taken out once a day, or it would interfere with the draft. Mum and Dad and the baby were plenty warm through the night, and the heater going and the range on in the kitchen. When the alarm rang in the black of the morning, the street light shining on their bedroom window lit up a frosty jungle of lacy white fern and grasses that had grown over the window pane in the night. The sleet storm was going to be followed by a magical day. Once or twice each winter, the weather gods served up a magical day to the Haligonians. It transformed their old, weather-beaten city into a crystal palace. On a magical day, every twig of every tree and every power wire and telephone wire sparkled in its icy sheath and was set against a backdrop of winter-blue sky and lemon-yellow sunshine. It was going to be a beautiful day for Dad to be walking his beat. While Dad moistened the soap in his shaving cup and stirred it into a white lather, while he applied this to his face with his soft, round shaving brush, and then scraped it off with his straight razor, Mum went into the kitchen with the baby and jacked the range up to high to get the kettle boiling. By the time Dad was ready to eat, the coffee was perking up into the little glass piece in the coffee pot lid. The porridge was swelling in slow bubbles that burst and puffed out jets of steam. Mum said, "The porridge has the strangest smell this morning. I can't imagine what I've done to it." They ate the porridge and it tasted fine, with the brown sugar and cream. Then Dad said, "Pour me another coffee, will you, hon, while I shine my boots." He got out the wax and the polishing rag from the closet under the sink, and then he went to get his boots from the usual place behind the door. "You haven't seen my boots?" he asked. "Your boots?" Mum said. Then at the same moment, they both looked at the closed door of the hot oven, and they remembered where the boots were. Mum knew why the porridge had smelled strange. The boots were well done. The uppers were shrunk and wizened. The surface of the leather was cracked like a mud hole in an August drought. The toes curled steeply upward like the tips of a pair of skis. When Dad tried to straighten the bottom of one of them, a deep crack split clear across the sole. On the linoleum floor of Mum and Dad's flat at 682 Roby Street stood the only pair of leather boots that Dad owned. And it was obvious that no pair of human feet would ever get inside them again. Dad was due at the station in 45 minutes. "Never mind," Mum said. "I'll run and phone in and say that you can't make it this morning. Then you can go out and buy yourself another pair of boots for tomorrow." What could Dad say? So Mum bundled up against the cold, and she went out into the grey dawning, and she ran down the street to the little grocery store that opened early and where she could use the phone. Before long she was back, rosy and puffing from the running. "The sidewalk's all ice," she said. "I almost fell." "Did you get through to the station?" "Yes, I did," she said. She flashed Dad a smile that had a touch of mischief in the corner of it, but Dad was too preoccupied to notice. "I spoke to Sergeant Charlie Judge," she said. "I told him you weren't feeling well this morning, and that you were sorry for calling in this late, but it took you kind of sudden, and you didn't think you could make it to work today." She said, "Did I say the right thing?" "Sure," Dad said. "That was great." But his voice didn't sound spirited. It bothered him to have to tell a lie like that. He said, "I hate to have to miss a day over this, you know." "Yes, I know, honey," Mom said. She said, "Sergeant Charlie Judge was very understanding. He said it doesn't do to take chances with your health." The mischief that was lurking in Mom's smile broke out then into a full grin. She said, "He's sending the doctor around to check you over." So Dad, instead of going out into the Crystal Palace, hung his constable's uniform back on its hanger. He got back into his pajamas, and he crawled back into bed to wait for the doctor. The doctor did not arrive promptly, and by noon Dad was feeling genuinely ill. For lunch, Mom heated some leftover split pea soup and served it to Dad in bed. It was thick and yellow, and Mom had made the broth from a ham bone, but Dad didn't notice that it was delicious. He was wondering when the doctor would come. He could have gone out and bought some boots already, but he hadn't dared to get out of bed. If the doctor didn't come around to see him until late afternoon, Dad wouldn't have time to go out before the stores closed. And then what excuse would he have to give to the sergeant for not going to work tomorrow morning? Dad didn't taste his pea soup, but he ate it, and before long the doctor came knocking at the door. He came in, and he said, "How's the patient feeling?" And he put a wooden tongue depressor on Dad's tongue, and he looked down his throat. "Your tonsils seem okay," the doctor said. He felt the glands in Dad's neck and his armpits. "There doesn't seem to be any infection," he said. "There's no swelling here." He put his thermometer into Dad's mouth, and he shone his little flashlight into his eyes. "Your color's good," he said. He took out the thermometer and held it up to the window to read. "Your temperature's normal," he said. Dad said, "I'm feeling much better now than I was in the morning." The doctor said, "It doesn't seem to be anything serious. I wouldn't worry about it if I were you." "I won't," Dad said. "I'm sure I'll be able to make it into work tomorrow." "Just be sure not to get chilled," the doctor said. He put on his hat and his overcoat, and he left. Dad had waited for a while, and then he got dressed in his civilian clothes, and he went out into the silvery sunshine. It was indeed a magical day. He headed across the school grounds to the little shoe store on Agricola Street, and while he was gone, Mum took the shriveled boots down the back stairs to the trash can in the basement. After that day, Dad never neglected to wear his rubber overboots when the skies threatened rain. The story of Dad's boots is almost over. You'll want to know that he and Mum decided not to buy that house on Connaught Avenue because they both knew there would always be unexpected expenses cropping up that a person couldn't plan on ahead of time. But the real estate man was right in predicting that the house would be a good investment, because the war came along to give a boost to the economy in Halifax. 5 years later, the same house came up for sale again, and the price had risen from $4,000 to $16,000. But that is neither here nor there, for who of us can know what is baking for us in the oven of life before the oven door is opened. And that's the end of the story of Dad's boots. Bye for now.